All right, we are back and we're talking about comprehend. So, Ro, what is comprehend? What's the use of it?
So think of comprehend as the machine learning based service that is based for, or that's all about natural language processing. So it's AWS's service that takes a bunch of text and it gives you a whole lot of different API calls that do different things. So if you want, for example, sentiment analysis, you give it a passage and you say, tell me what the sentiment is for either the passage or a sentence or whatever. Or you could ask it to find all the topics or entities that are being discussed in that particular passage. And that's really neat. So Comprehend has a whole bunch of API that makes it really easy to comprehend programmatically what you're looking at from a text standpoint.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's comprehend really, really neat to be able to extract this structured data out of natural text. And actually, you did a really good demo on our AWS Made Easy Let's Code repository. I'm putting that in the chat right now. So this
and
is how.
I contrast that with what we used to do maybe 20 years ago, where NLP wasn't really a thing. We used to write a whole lot of regexes to figure out, certain kind of structure in the sentence or in the word, and English being what it is, or any other language. I mean, most of the languages as well. They aren't meant for structured programming language. I mean, that's why we create very structured programming languages to talk to computers. Natural spoken languages aren't very precise.
Yeah, it's not very structured.
Correct.
Well, I'll show you what we're using comprehend for. Okay, so I put the comprehend in the chat. So what we're using comprehend, and I think this is really, really neat. I'll share my ClickUp view first, and then I'll share the how it works. Let's see, here we go. Window and ClickUp. Okay, so in ClickUp, we're looking at all of our episodes, and we always talk about AWS. And one thing we want to know is what services did we talk about in a particular episode? And so we built this component using comprehend. So for example, in episode 11, we talked about QuickSight, TimeStream, Redshift, Dynamo, Neptune, which is a bit rare, Athena, Aurora, Kendra. So we talked about all these different services. So I wanted to show you how this list gets populated. So I'll switch gears to, again, this is all driven by automation. I'll show you this automation first before we switch over. Here, we're saying when we get a transcript, then we're going to call a Lambda webhook that runs comprehend. So let's show you that Lambda webhook. So I'm going to open up a dev space and share that screen with you. Right. Here we go. So this is in my Livestream automation v2 repository, which I'll make public. What the cool thing about it, we mentioned this last week. This is, if you see here, it says generated from AWS Made Easy, SAM Lambda Pi Graviton. So we made a template repository that makes it really easy to just deploy a Lambda function to a URL. Now, in this case, I have my I'll show you my app.py, and it's running comprehend on. It's a really simple body. Okay, when we get the event coming in, the task, the ClickUp task in JSON is the payload. And so we want to run comprehend task on that task. Now, what does comprehend task do? Well, it gets the transcript, it gets the episode number, it runs detect entities, and then it looks for entities of type title or commercial item. And then it will populate this field in ClickUp with AWS services. So I can show you what it looks like when you're interacting with comprehend. Give me a moment to get this set up. let's see here. App.py. Load in all the function definitions, and then we should have a task. Okay, great. So we've got a task, and now let's run. We'll step into comprehend task over here. All right. So
I think you forgot the function definition
oh,
in the copy. Yeah.
I should have gotten. Oh, no, I see what I need. I need to populate a variable. Give me 1 second to. This is one variable I don't want on the screen. It's just my my API key. Give me 1 second. Headers. Okay. 1 second here. Okay. Clear and back on. Okay. So just stepping through this code, it's getting the task, and then it's running. There we go. Let's look at the entities list. Entities list. Okay,
Yeah.
here's found an organization called Lambda, a commercial item called S3 SageMaker, a title called EC2, an organization called Amazon, and so on. And so this here this actually is probably not needed. We're just aggregating it to some I want to get a count here. So we mentioned EC2 once, SageMaker once. And now what I do is to map it to ClickUp, I get a list of the custom fields. I already did that. 1 second.
Yeah. So, by the way, I almost forgot about the fact that you actually get categories for the stuff that you put in comprehend, which is virtually impossible. So even if you did regexes, to identify words, or it's almost like the tokenizer that you built for a compiler. If you built a tokenizer that gave you all the words, just the exercise of going through and finding the category of a particular word, whether it's a name, whether it's a person, whether it's an entity, whether it's a title, it's just impossible to do it. And if you didn't have ML-based NLP, I mean, it would just be an absolute nightmare.
Completely agree. It makes this so much easier. All right, so what I've done is I've queried ClickUp for my AWS services field, and these are all the UUIDs of each of the choices that I have. And now I just map what I found to the field values there. And I create okay, so in this case, I found EC2 and that other one, S3 SageMaker. I look at the value list, S3 SageMaker. That there's still, it's still natural language processing. Sometimes it doesn't separate it perfectly. So it'll give me this one value that I can update. So I wanted to show you how this all ties together. So at the end of the episode, for example, here's a speech, Raul, that you gave recently at the AWS Anaheim Summit. We've got the transcript. Now I'm going to switch over to my ClickUp view. I'm going to ask the StreamYard people if there's a more efficient way to share multiple windows at a time. But here's my ClickUp view. Now here is your CloudFix talk that you gave. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to paste in the transcript. So we have automation that would populate this based on a webhook, but we'll do this manually. Here is the transcript. We will close that. And that's going to fire our automation. And we'll wait a second or two for that. Let's refresh ClickUp and see which AWS services you mentioned in your talk. Okay, there we go.
This one.
You talked about CloudFront, SageMaker, Redshift, Dynamo, Athena, Aurora, EC2, EBS, EFS, and S3.
That makes sense. Yep. Those are all the things that I spoke about.
Awesome. And then so
This
now,
is so neat.
it's really cool just to think about what are we actually talking about. We can do other analytics on this. If we wanted to then filter and say, well, AWS services, what are all of the times that we talked about, well, I don't know, Redshift? Okay, and then it goes back here. It says we talked about Redshift in episode 11 and episode 12 and in Raul's CloudFix Anaheim talk.
Yeah.
So
that, I mean, something like that, looking through video conversations in an organized manner like this would have been virtually impossible just a couple of years ago. It's amazing that we're able to do that now.
And we can look at it. So the other thing that we want to look at, thinking about the future, is we can also make a custom entity recognition model. So, for example, when we talk about certain products that we like that aren't S3, for example, we talk about dev flows, about dev spaces, we could make a custom entity recognition model that's looking for those, and then we could look at when do we mention those, when do we talk about other companies, other people. People gets tagged as its own entity, so we can run custom entity recognition models using the same template, and then having them mapped to a fixed set of tags. It makes it really easy to stay organized. I think that's really the name of the game. When we were 5 or 6 episodes in, it's really easy to remember what we did for each episode. But now this is episode 19. It is easy to forget when we talked about a particular topic. And so by being able to stay organized in this way, it's been really helpful.
Correct. And between this, a bunch of other podcasts and all the other content stuff that we've been working on, it absolutely, I mean, it gets so confusing about where we spoke about a particular topic, or, where to point when somebody comes back to us with a question and says, hey, do you have an opinion on X, Y, or Z? It's really hard to go recollect, or it's very, very hard to point them to that particular video or that particular episode. I remember, the first 1 or 2 episodes were great. It was really easy. We covered a bunch of topics. And now if I want to figure out, hey, we talked about that announcement about custom. In fact, why don't we do this? There was an announcement about SageMaker entities. SageMaker custom entities. We talked about that in one of the episodes.
So let's see.
You might have to share the screen again.
Yep, I'll put this on here. Oops, add to stream. There we go. So I'll go to AWS Services and look at SageMaker.
Yeah.
Here's the times that we've talked about SageMaker. Let's see, we talked about it in episode 2, episode 7, the What's New review. And we talked about it in 10 and 16. Well,
I think it's in the What's New review. I think it was episode 16, the What's New review, where we talked about custom entities that you could build into SageMaker models.
Well, let's have a look at 16 and see which segments we covered. Okay, so it's here we go. We talked. Oh, that was the SageMaker pipelines.
No, that is not it. So then it was the other one. It was episode. What is it again?
Let me add this filter.
By the way, can you imagine doing this without having all these tags and these entities already filled in? And I think we're going to talk about an easier way to figure this out, right?
Yes. I think this is actually a really good, what do you call this? This is a really good preview. Because even this is good for tagging, and eventually I want to tag the individual segments. Okay, here we go. Segment SageMaker autopilot experiments are now 10x faster.
No, it's the next one. They're announcing heterogeneous cluster for model training.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've spoken about custom entities during that episode.
And then we can look at we've got the article URL. This was with Badri. So it's pretty neat. We have all that mapped. Now, some of this automation we've developed as we've gone along. So I'm still kind of backfilling all of the processes. Oh, and also just one thing I also wanted to share, I guess as part of this little sub segment. the data model that we've come up with to kind of manage all this. So we're talking about segments and highlights as if they're, you know, very distinct things. Let me share my screen. Here we go. So I think this makes sense in terms of how I think about it. So when we're planning, we've got segments that we want to talk about, right? We'll say, okay, first we're going to talk about our show notes generator. Then we're going to talk about we're going to talk about comprehend, and we're going to talk about QuickSight, and we're going to talk about Kendra. So we have this linear progression of segments that we've thought through. Now we don't know how long we're going to take. You know, sometimes you can talk a long time or a short time. So then when we actually record it, we run those transitions that, again, we talked about last time, but we generate to put a few of these frames in here that we can key on. And then we talked about in the last episode, segment AWS, this is recognition segment detector API, is going to tell us exactly when that happens. And then so we run that automation against our video, we get these numbers, and that helps us generate what we call highlights. So highlights, we have one highlight per segment, but we can also have more. For example, if we just have a short little quote that we wanted to talk about. So a highlight, it's at least a one-to-one with the segments, but sometimes there's more. And then when we post the highlights, depending on where they're posted, so these get posted to LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Twitch channel. And then when we make a social media post, we'll post the highlight plus some commentary in the social media post. But the tricky thing is on LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitch, you're not really limited. But on Twitter, you're limited to a 90-second clip. So we take the highlight and generate what we call a preview highlight, which is at most 90 seconds. And then it says, we have this little 3-second video that we tack on to the end that says, for the full video, see the link in the tweet. And that way we can use Twitter Live, but stay under that 90-second threshold. And so that's our flow. And so this whole process is managing this from our free form recording here, plus the segments, all the way into this very structured view. And then I think in the in a future episode, we can show how we actually gather this all back in terms of a big picture view of how the social is doing.
Right.
Cool. So that's our data model. And so we're talking about segments to highlights to social posts. That's what we're doing.
Excellent. So we leave that problem that we just spoke about where we wanted to search for some context or some content in an episode that we did in the past, and how we use a different AWS service to achieve that. So,
all right.
Okay, so which is the next service that we're talking about?
Well, let's jump out of order here and let's go to Kendra. Here it goes.